the system of control that Israel has placed, both within the international borders of Israel and in the occupied territories, is a very elaborate system. There's a lot of materials that have been published on the many ways, different kinds of permits that people need to move from one place to the other, the wall of separation, surveillance cameras, biometric information, biometric technology, that the Palestinians have to carry electronic cards with their biometric information in order to pass through the checkpoints. The list is staggering of how many ways that Israel is employing in order to control the population, divide the population, separate Israelis from Palestinians, separate Palestinians from Palestinians, separate Jews from Arabs. It's a very complex system, and it leads some people to think that there is a master plan, that somehow, somewhere behind all of this complexity, there is a group of planners who set all these ideas in motion, and they have a plan of what to do about Palestine. But that's not true. It simply isn't true. There is no conspiracy and there is no master plan. The Israeli government is, in fact, completely paralyzed. Every faction within Israeli society has a different idea and a different strategy of what Israel should be doing, what are the policies, and there is no unifying strategy. And because of that, Israel is just putting more and more layers of ad hoc, immediate solutions, rather than trying to come up with a long-term solution. The reason for this is that we have to remember Israel was created by paramilitary warriors, terrorist organizations that saw themselves as anti-imperialist fighters shaking off British colonialism in Palestine. They told themselves that story because they just didn't see the Palestinian population as indigenous. They didn't consider them to be the original inhabitants of the land. So from their point of view, it was just a struggle against British imperialism, and they saw themselves as the indigenous population. And as they got rid of imperialism in their eyes, they didn't want to create a state in the normal sense, which is a representative of the public will and the public interest. They wanted to create an ongoing project. They wanted Israel to be an ongoing Zionist project, what they consider to be the Jewish state, that will continually draw Jews from all over the world, expand its territory in order to find more territory for these Jews to settle in order to continue the Zionist project over many years. And because of that, they felt that it would be wrong to create very clear structures of government. Instead, the plan was to give a lot of leeway and a lot of authority to lower-ranking officers in the army, to lower-ranking officials in government, to make up their own minds. Because there was a kind of unwritten understanding amongst them that they are all in the same camp, and they don't need to put things in paper. That's why Israel doesn't have a constitution until today. That's why there are various informal agreements with the ultra-Orthodox community within Israel, the ultra-Orthodox Jewish community, which is allowed to have its own autonomy within the state. That is why a lot of the decisions are taken by the secret police in a very untransparent and unaccountable way. This is part of a governmental philosophy that has gone terribly wrong. And it has gone wrong because you cannot keep this unwritten understanding between people over decades. Not that the original purpose of this Zionist movement was something I approve of in any way, but it was at least consistent. They had a clear plan. But that plan changed. And in 1967, they reached a kind of, with the war and the occupation, they reached an impasse, because some of the key members of the Zionist movement thought that their best strategy is to keep Israel a small country with a clear Jewish majority, and others said that the territory must constantly be expanded, and the population could and the Palestinian population could somehow be gotten rid of, one way or another. And these conflicting ideas just created a rift and a paralysis within the Israeli system. So, if you look at the wall of separation, the wall of separation was supposed to cost about $1 billion originally. That was the original plan for the wall, and they made the route, and they found companies to build it. But because the wall was planned by colonists who decided to make some last-minute changes in the route and include their own colonies, and then human rights organizations appealed the route of the wall to the High Court, and sometimes the High Court asked the army to remove some part of that wall, and so the army sometimes agreed, sometimes they didn't agree, sometimes they removed the wall, waited 1 year, and then built it again, hoping that the High Court will forget. This is a way that a completely dysfunctional government operates. And this dysfunctional government reached a point where the wall of separation cost more than $5 billion. $5 billion instead of $1. This is not because... and the wall of separation is just one example out of many. I use it here just to signify how this whole system of occupation has gone completely out of hand. In many areas, the wall of separation has been driven by small sectarian interests of a specific military officer or a specific official in, let's say, the Jerusalem municipality, that the wall doesn't follow any seemingly rational route, and it just divides neighborhoods in half. It divides Palestinians from Palestinians. It prevents Palestinian children from reaching their schools or reaching their hospitals. And this, of course, puts then pressure on the Israeli government to, well, they should allow children to go to school. They should allow people to cross the wall. And then the whole purpose of separation is also undermined. And so there are also areas where they haven't finished the wall. Overall, the wall is an apartheid project. It's not legitimate, and the International Court in The Hague already ruled that the wall is illegal, must be removed. But it is nevertheless a project that shows, at the same time, the inefficiency and ineffectiveness of Israeli government. So there is no coherent system. There is a lot of mess of different systems that mesh together and sometimes don't mesh together. The checkpoints are another excellent example. The checkpoints that were built in the West Bank and around the Gaza Strip were one of the places where military officers didn't like sending the soldiers to, because that turns the soldiers into kind of policemen. And they thought that soldiers should be trained in battle and not stand in checkpoints all day. And as the number of young Israelis who are willing to go to the army drops, and it is dropping very fast, even though because of economic reasons, not because of political reasons.
What do you mean?
I mean that a lot of poor Israelis from lower socioeconomic classes, avoid military service by many different ways, in order to not because they don't believe in the army or they don't believe in the government policies, but because they don't want to pay a personal sacrifice for that. So the army actually gets smaller every year.
What do you mean personal sacrifice?
Well, to go to the army for 3 years instead of and risking their lives, and instead of finding a job, instead of going to university, or instead of starting their own family. Why would they do that? If they feel that the economic system is not functioning, the welfare system is not functioning, the government doesn't really do anything for them, why should they do something for the government? So less people go to the army. They find many ways to avoid it. It's obviously still obligatory by law, but there are many ways to avoid it. I also avoided it. And this, so all these young Israelis that don't go to the army and make the army smaller and smaller create a crisis for the military officers in person power. So the army decided to privatize all of the checkpoints, and so they bring in private companies. But as they brought in these private companies and created the checkpoints, the private companies thought they don't want to be held accountable for various mishaps that happen in the checkpoints, like somebody who needs urgent medical attention and is stopped at the checkpoint and ends up dying at the checkpoint. It's something that they just didn't want to deal with. So they tried to make the checkpoints into automatic terminals with no human interaction. That Palestinians who go through these privatized checkpoints, and you can see this very strongly in Kalandia, in Shir Hever, and most of all in the Erez checkpoint near Gaza, they can pass through the checkpoint without seeing a human being. The soldiers or the security guards working for the private companies are behind a concrete wall. They see you with a camera, they speak to you with a speaker. You get instructions where you should put your bag and what you should do, and all this system is intended to take the decision making away from the security guards and try to make everything streamlined and efficient, to treat Palestinians as if they were cattle. And nevertheless, despite all these programs and the elaborate schemes of how these checkpoints are designed and all this technology that is used in the checkpoints, nevertheless, there are 9 different authorities in Israel which are supposed to manage the checkpoints, and nobody knows which one of them has the responsibility. So every checkpoint at any given time might be receiving conflicting instructions from up to 9 different parts of the Israeli government, including the army, the Ministry of Defense, the police, the anti-terrorist council. These are just some of these organizations. So it is a very complex and a system. It is not functioning. It costs a lot of money. It causes further expenses to the Israeli government, and in order to pay for the cost of these checkpoints and the wall and other aspects of the occupation, the prisons, the government cuts public services, cuts health, cuts education, cuts transportation, and then young Israelis feel that the state has abandoned them, that they're not receiving the basic welfare which they deserve, and therefore many of them just decide they don't want to go to the army anymore, and the situation kind of exacerbates itself in a snowball effect.